ourselves. The storms, the volcanoes, the earthquakes. Aside from that, God was inaccessible and remote. And then as people began to form societies, individuals recognized that some among us seem to have insight and understanding far beyond what most of us have. They seem to have access to divine wisdom, and these people were elevated into a position of priest. And all communication, all contact, all discourse with the divine occurred through the priest. That is essentially what a priest is, the conduit of God. And then, as societies grew larger and more complicated and more people got together, we needed layers of management. We had priests and bishops and archbishops. And you notice as that happens, the head guy seems to get closer and closer in status to God. But the status of the people never changes, because the status of the people is always entirely different from the divine. And then Luther comes along. And Luther tells us, realize he was trained as a monk. He was a Catholic. But what he saw was a massive accumulation of power and wealth in the hands of those who had ecclesial power, and he said, this is not okay, this is not scriptural, this is not God. With the Gutenberg Bible, people began to read their own scriptures, and they got it. This isn't God. This idea that the divine could be used as a mechanism for accumulation of power, control, and wealth was utterly offensive to the scriptures. And so, under Luther, what happened was instead of priests, we have pastors. The language of the pastor is prevalent throughout the New Testament. In an agrarian society, it makes sense. Someone who takes care of others is a shepherd, a pastor. And a bishop was simply a pastor of many flocks, not a divine conduit in any sense. This was the biggest theological outcome of the Reformation, and it gave us the notion of the priesthood of all believers. That is to say, that contact, that connection is in your hands. Everybody can talk to God, and everybody can receive from God. There is no special designated human being or collection of human beings who do that. And excuse me. So what begins to happen now is that you have no central leadership figure. You have life evolving within individual congregations. It's not all about Rome or Jerusalem or Constantinople anymore. It's all about what happens within the congregation. But what if we really believe what we say, that God is everywhere? Well, then, lessons from the divine, understanding of Scripture, the important moral teachings don't just come from clergy. In fact, what happens is, instead of a congregation organized with a standard organizational chart like the one printed on the front of your order of service, this happens. It turns upside down because the committees and committee chairs who actually do the activity and work of the church on the ground serve God in the people. And the board of directors, trustees, deacons, whatever our language is, the board serves those activities which express God as present in the people. And the minister is at the bottom, serving everybody. Now, within the Unitarians and the Universalists, but especially the Unitarians, because these tended to be more highbrow, highly educated folk, what happens after a few years of following this inherently Baptist model is that, we realize the old church, the Roman church, had something that we really want, and that is professionally trained, highly educated scholars and teachers. And if we find the voice of God in the individual people and our preachers rise up from within the congregation, they might be terrific or they might not. So Unitarians and Universalists
for a minute on her. I want to go tell them something.
created structures of training, certification, credentialing, and began bodies of professional scholars and teachers to serve these congregations, so that what we end up with is a congregation where the power, the authority resides entirely in the members. If you sign the book, you're in charge. And the minister, instead of being simply at the bottom within the structure, is a hired hand, stuck, afterthought. The church exists without me. The church, as it is today, cannot exist as it is today without each and every one of you. Because it is those people who create the very being that is the church. However, me, extraneous. I'm a hired hand. So, that puts me in kind of a peculiar situation. Because in our culture, we quite often think that the minister is the head of the church. In our tradition, the opposite is the case. Technically. But in real life, you still called me to speak with the voice of the congregation, with the authority of our faith. You identified specific executive functions that you wanted to place in the hand of a minister, because somebody has to have the last word. So, you put me in charge of something with a contract that makes it explicit that I am in charge of these things, which is to say, quite frankly, this thing right here, Sunday morning service. And everything else is yours. And when you decide you're done with me, you bring somebody else to be in charge of what happens here on Sunday morning. So ultimately, you're in charge of that too. So I love that Amy, I had no idea what the story was going to be. But the pets was an analogy for me. I wanted to ask, who here is in charge of an animal at home? Now,
Supposedly.
you're in charge, right?
Yeah.
You're the boss. So when you come home at the end of a long day and you don't feel like doing anything, the animal puts dinner on. And picks up the stuff that ends up being dropped on the floor and pays the bills at the end of the month. Because you're the boss. Now we all understand it's so painfully obvious that being in charge of a pet means that you meet its every need. So, what? Am I actually making a comparison of the congregation to a pet? I kind of am. There are, strikingly, similarities. It surprised me when I began to think about it. Because the congregation is a living being. It has, yes, a personality. It does not have a conscience or individual will. If you've studied sociology or theological anthropology, Reinhold Niebuhr is famous for this book, Moral Man and Immoral Society. Moral man and immoral society obviously clings to archaic gendered language, but the point is clear. Now, he's not saying that society is bad. We would probably translate it better, amoral. Because in fact, a society of people, when people get together, what's suddenly missing is a conscience. And when you think deeply about this, you begin to understand how we erupt into mob violence and riots and even warfare. Because when we affiliate ourselves with a group, it is almost unconscious that we subvert our own conscience to the will of the group. We subjugate ourselves to something bigger. That's what church is all about. We subjugate ourselves, our egos, our private will, our self-seeking to something larger and more important. But unfortunately, what happens when you do that with a group of people, you're subjugating yourself to something that by its very nature has no conscience. Not that it's bad, it's just the nature of it. Pets. Love them. They've got their own personalities, but really, dog shaming aside, you can't engage in moral reasoning with a pet. They just can't do it. It's not that they're bad. We love our pets, and the more that individuals are in a circumstance of oppression, the more we tend to connect with our animals. Think about that. Women more likely than men. Gay, bisexual, transgender people more likely than heterosexual. People who find themselves generally isolated in their daily experience walk the streets knowing that they cannot be fully present in their entire and authentic selves and still be safe, are more likely to bond deeply with a pet and experience the loss of a pet like the loss of a family member. And as I began to think about that, it made so much more sense, the diversity of experience that I have seen in the loss of pets. Of course, it's not a universal rule, but it's interesting to observe. And the more separated, isolated, cut off, hidden we feel in our daily life, the more desperate our need for spiritual community. Those who tend to stay on the very surface, or who go to the big church because it's a social network and marketing advantage. Those tend to be people who have advantage in society. Nobody goes to a Unitarian Universalist church on Sunday morning because it's the popular thing to do. At least not in this town. Boston, maybe, I don't know, but certainly not in the South. Nobody identifies with a liberal religious tradition for the social advantage. We here are deeply connected to a body the congregation. But we can't really tell it what to do. We can try to train it. We set up rules and policies and procedures. But ultimately, it is the beautiful, blessed, powerful, divine nature of the congregation that it is really pretty much out of control. And so, if we hope to lead this body, to bring it to a place that we envision a place of social transformation, a place of safety and healing, a place of comfort and warmth, a place of insight and deepening, all of those things. If that's what we want, in our tradition, we have to do it ourselves. Yeah, that's what I said. I was only a member of a congregation the day that I heard someone complain about the sitting minister saying, I am not being spiritually fed. And my gut reaction, not spoken, fortunately, was, you know where the kitchen is. Unitarian Universalist practice means participating in preparation of the meal. It means you're in charge. It means if there is something missing, if there is something amiss, if something tastes a little off, you gotta speak up. Fortunately, you've got a minister who likes to hear that. I've been in congregations where people would try to take responsibility for the life of the congregation and be shut down. You are in charge. This body will be what you choose for it to be. And my role here is to serve in catalyzing, enabling, reinforcing, energizing, guiding, strengthening, leading your vision. Yes, I know you well enough now, and I love you deeply enough now. I have a vision for you. Yes, I do. But in the nature of our polity, the board serves the people on the committees who are doing the activities. The president presides over board meetings. The minister serves the whole. So as I present and offer pieces of what I dream for this congregation, they remain only mine until they become yours. You're in charge. You have graciously given me what is a tenet of our Unitarian Universalist tradition, freedom of the pulpit. That is a very old phrase, and it is an absolute condition of every contract with every union minister. Freedom of the pulpit. You have called me to speak my own conscience, whether you want to hear it or not. And to do less than make you uncomfortable, to do less than make you annoyed or even angry, sometimes would be a failure in my ministry. I have said that my sermons are crafted in such a way that they disturb the preacher. Until they do that, they're not a sermon. And what is perhaps most disturbing to me today should not disturb you at all, but reassure, because what set me a little on edge is that you do not need me. You will continue to be who you are. In fact, this body has existed, evolved, and regenerated itself daily for nearly 50 years without me. And it will be something amazing if, to the extent that the members of the congregation accept the responsibility of the care and feeding of this amazing, divine presence on this earth. You are in charge. So if you would, join me now in singing our closing hymn, Rise as You Are Willing.